skill I don't have and I admire very much. So thank you so much for making it possible. And I want to thank you all for coming out. I'm excited to be here. I've never been to Miami before, and I've never been to the Miami Maker Faire. It is really terrific. I'm so impressed at what you've done in just a few short years creating this Maker Faire at this scale. So let me grab a clicker here, and I'm going to be juggling this laptop and that one and moving through. So first off, my daughter wanted me to point out that's her a few years ago in a Halloween costume. She was playing the pirate fairy from a Tinkerbell movie that I actually happened to work on. I used to work at Disney, and I worked on this movie, and she decided to be Zarina, the pirate fairy. And in the movie, there's this sparkling bag that is filled with colored pixie dust. And we decided to build with the Circuit Playground Express a prop for her that had capacitive touch, and she could change the colors on it. She was very proud of it, so I used her picture in the project there. So that's Bia a few years ago. So let's talk about what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. First of all, that's my workshop, and that's actually my workshop in sort of a cleaned up state. I'm not naturally a very organized or neat person. And I was talking to some friends about this recently. The really nice thing about having your own personal workshop is that the organization is all in my head, and I actually know where things are here, but I dread the idea of someone coming in to work alongside me because it would be very hard to explain where things are. So that's my workshop, and what I want to talk about is why I think sharing is a really important part of making, and actually a really important part of making and learning or leveling up your skills. And then I'll talk about some different ways that you can share and some examples of how I share in projects that I make and share. So let's see, I'm gonna talk a little bit about myself. So I have a technical and creative background, and I worked for about 20 years in computer graphics and animation. I was at Disney Animation and Sony ImageWorks doing animation and visual effects. And then I also spent a couple years with Disney Research, which was part of Disney Imagineering, which was a lot of fun, especially because a lot of Star Wars land was being worked on when I was there. But along the side of that, I was also working with Make Magazine and Maker Fairs from around the beginning, somewhere around 2007, 2008. I started doing projects for Maker Faire and building projects to put into the magazine. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Make Magazine or some of the Make Online stuff, but it was a really exciting chance for me to start showing how I build projects. And it was also a great chance to start doing more physical building with my hands of actual stuff versus all the pixels I've been dealing with in my career. So I kind of moonlighted on the side for a number of years, about 10, 12 years, fairly heavily. At one point I hosted a TV show that we did on public television called Make Television. But a few years ago I decided to go full-time, and so I left Disney and started working for Adafruit Industries, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a company that builds open source hardware and software that is used in a lot of maker types of projects. And so I've kind of got a dream job now, which is full-time maker sharer of stuff. So I get to play show and tell, which I've never stopped enjoying show and tell. That's one of my favorite things I built on a Disney movie, which is this robotic hat from the movie Meet the Robinsons called Doris. She's evil, but I love her anyway. And that was a crazy compressed air t-shirt cannon that we built, or that we had on the Make Television show. So here is the, let's sing with myself. Here is the sort of heart of the talk, which is this notion that through sharing the things that you're making, you tend to level up your skills or learn. And you'll notice I didn't actually use the word learning in the title because that scares people off, but I think there's something really exciting about taking on projects that you don't know how you're going to do. And I think a lot of us would get bored if we were building things that didn't challenge us. Not everyone. It's sometimes really peaceful and fun to build something you know exactly how you're going to do. But I tend to build things that I'm not quite sure how I'm going to make when I get involved. And that can be through collaboration with someone, that can be through some new idea or part or software I want to try out or fabrication technique. And so what I found is there's a lot of ways to learn, but one that really puts the pressure on is sharing as you go. And as Mario mentioned, I do like to build things live on air on my live stream, and I like to share things as I'm going rather than just presenting the finished project. which I think really helps push you to get past roadblocks and mistakes. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So, putting up a little of my slide management skills. So let's talk about learning maker skills. And to step back for a second, when I talk about making, as you've probably seen out here at Miami Maker Faire, it's a huge range of things that can kind of fall under this umbrella category of making. It can be food, it can be electronics, it can be robotics, it can be crafts, woodworking, welding, different types of fabrication. So I feel like it doesn't really matter if we're talking about electronics or making great coffee as an amateur barista. A lot of this applies, and what I found is people who are heavily interested in an area of making do tend to find their communities and their ways of sharing out there. So ways to learn, of course, there's formal schooling or classes or mentors, and these tend to be person-to-person or person-to-group types of learning. Then there's also trial and error, or rebuilding things that you've seen other people make. Say, okay, I just want to maybe pull that apart, modify it, put it back together, or build things from kits. And this can be a solo endeavor, or it can involve communication in one way or another with the original maker of the project, or someone who can give you a hand. There are loads and loads of tutorials. I think we're living in a really rich age of tutorials that are available for all sorts of things. It's if you look at sites like Instructables, Make has various maker project repositories online for past projects, as well as PDFs of pretty much everything from the magazine over the years, as well as Adafruit, the company I work for, has a Learn Guide system that has, I think at this point, over 1,300 tutorials in it. So that's just picking a few places where you can go and find tutorials on different subjects. And then there's, of course, YouTube. I probably don't need to say much about that, but show of hands, how many people have learned how to do something or change or fix a thing, put things together through YouTube. It's an incredible resource, really is. I think back when I was a kid getting into making, that didn't exist, so there was sometimes a chance to do an interlibrary loan on a book that might be about something you're interested in, or try to get a ham radio license as an entry into electronics that you didn't really have an interest in radios, but you wanted to at least learn somehow. It was kind of sideways and harder if you didn't have a mentor or a class locally. Now it's beamed into everyone's homes, which is incredible. Then there are in-person hacker spaces or meetups or clubs or interest groups, which I think are, again, a really great way of sharing and learning with other makers. And then, as I mentioned, there's books, libraries, magazines that can also help you. So, moving on. So how do I see sharing as something that helps you learn? Well, one thing, I was talking with someone outside just a minute ago before, documenting a project. So part of sharing is often taking some photos or writing up a little description of things as you go, or shooting a video, or just like saying, oh my God, come here, look, you have to see this. I'll run out of my workshop and show someone a thing that usually my wife and my kids that I've built because I'm just excited about it. But the documentation process, I think, really can help you focus on what are the key steps. So if you're suddenly outside of your head where you're just trying to build a thing and get it done, and you're instead trying to think, what are just the key things I want to show? Because typically I don't just let a camera roll for 1 week while I'm working on building something. I kind of find little select moments because it's saner than trying to sift through all of that footage. So I find that taking the time to say, here's a step. If I'm thinking about someone else in the future trying to put this thing together, what matters? What are the steps along the way that matter? So I think that takes you out of the moment of building the thing and allows you to step outside of yourself and your immediate problems on a project and think about it in a larger context. And what this can do sometimes is, and I'll give an example of this later, it can make you realize that you're going about things in a silly way. So sometimes you're saying, okay, now I'll explain it, and you've just taken a step back and go, why am I even doing it that way? I can shortcut this by doing it that way. So I find that documentation is helpful. And it's also not uncommon for me to ruin a project in the process of building it and be really glad I can sift through my photos and see, how was this wired like yesterday before everything terrible happened and I ruined this thing? So I pulled wires out of a breadboard or something. So be able to just go back and help yourself, it's actually kind of a gift to future you. I also think that sharing forces you to clarify your thoughts and distill the concepts down. So having to explain it is really tremendous. And I have done this a number of times in life where I've decided to take on teaching something, either in a workshop or a formal class or writing about something, that I end up learning a lot about it in that process of teaching. And it really can help you learn things to have to explain it to someone else. And the third thing that I think helps is sharing can help place constraints and deadlines around your projects. So it's fine if you like projects that go on for a long, long time, or if you don't really feel like finishing a project when you get bored with it, that is awesome, do that. If it really gives you a lot of satisfaction to complete a project and put a bow on it and say, I'm done with that, I'm moving on to another thing, this is a really good way to put a deadline on a thing, or at least put a constraint on a thing and say, I'm going to start sharing through just Instagram photos early on as I'm building this. Well, now I've kind of committed on some level. Some people who are interested in following that on Instagram are waiting to see the continuation and the conclusion of that story. So there's an interesting psychology there, I think, where we can push ourselves by getting it out there into the world. Sometimes committed a little bit more by just saying, I'm building this thing, and people come and say, oh yeah, really? Well, let's hear more about it. Here's an example. So this is the Xbox adaptive controller, and this gizmo here. And what I decided to do was write up documentation of how you can plug in your own custom-made controllers. So these are made for people with alternate accessibility needs, people who can't use a regular joystick. So things like a foot pedal instead of a button that you're holding down with a thumb, or a larger joystick, breath controllers, nod controllers with limit switches. These are all things that can be plugged into the back of that device, which is tremendous. And what I decided to do was share with people how you would make your own custom controls rather than buying pre-made things. So there do exist large buttons and a lot of great hardware for people with accessibility needs, but sometimes it's either really expensive, a button is $120, or it's not exactly what someone needs. So with accessibility controls, it's all about customizing things. So when this came out, everyone was really excited. It's amazing what Microsoft has put together, but the documentation wasn't quite out yet when I set about doing this project, and then I was able to talk with people at Microsoft about, well, how do these two ports on here work? They're a little funny, and they talk about how their analog trigger system works. So I got a project out there that I think is going to help people understand how this works, and it helps me understand how this gizmo works. Really beautiful device. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you to some degree that sharing your projects as you're making them may be useful for your own learning or just for fun. So let's talk about some ways to actually do it. I kind of categorize these as in-person and online. So in person, there's maker fairs. You're here at a great one. You can see a lot of people sharing their projects, which is fantastic. You can go to smaller scale things like hacker spaces, maker spaces. Some of them will have a membership. Some of them will also have one night a week where non-members can come in and use equipment, or at least learn from the people there and talk about what their projects are, take workshops. Really fantastic. You can sign up to teach a workshop, like I said. So if you say, you know what, I am getting pretty handy with CircuitPython or Arduino or pulling amazing shots of espresso on a real machine, I want to go teach other people how to do that. It's really, I think, a fun way for everyone to build community around some kind of making. There's mentoring, and that can be one-on-one or one-on-many. And then other community events. There are library events, school events, after-school programs. There's a lot of ways to do in-person sharing of what you made. Then there are the multitude of online ways. We have video chat. So this is one that specifically Adafruit has been doing for a number of years, which is there's a free Google Hangouts web browser-based software. We essentially launch it at Wednesday at 5 p.m. I think it is Pacific Coast time, and we throw a little sign up, and people say, "Hey, I got something to show." And so about 8-10 people each take 2 minutes to show a project in this Google Hangout chat. I'll show you a bigger example of that in a second. There's social media, so sharing on Twitter, sharing on Facebook, sharing on Instagram, really great ways to just get things out there in little nuggets to show off what you're working on, or get feedback, ask questions, say, wow, why is this just plaguing me? And someone will say, you have this part in backwards. And you go, yes, I do, thank you, because I can't tell anymore. I'm too close to the project to see. I'll tell you a specific example of that sort of thing. It's so helpful for me to share out what I'm doing, because you can make really boneheaded mistakes so easily. Blogs and websites, so this may be very old-fashioned for some people in here to think about blogs and websites, but a free WordPress or other blog, you don't have to do a lot of maintenance on it, but just to throw up a post that's maybe a bit of a show and tell, a sort of little bit of documentation, a little bit of lab notes for yourself. Like I said, documenting things can help you. So sometimes I have a blog up, sometimes I'll just throw a project up there. I'll show you a little example of that too. And then there are online communities, so if you can find them, the online community that is for the thing you're interested in, the thing you like to build, and you find a good one, it's tremendous. I say if because it can be tricky. Online communities are very often anonymous, sometimes they're toxic, sometimes they're not friendly places, but if you can find the places where they are moderated well and the community takes care of itself, they're tremendous. And there are some examples I've seen. There are some Reddit forums where things are actually positive and helpful. I've seen the Discord channel that Adafruit has. How many people are familiar with Discord? It's a few. So it's a chat software that originally was made for gamers to actually communicate voice chat as they're playing games, but it also has text chat and some other capabilities. And a couple of years ago, Adafruit started a Discord server, and we have some moderators, and we have a code of conduct, and so basically people have to be respectful to each other, or they're asked to change their behavior or leave. And that's a hard thing to do, but somehow we managed to do it on this Discord server. And so now it's a place where you can go in and say, here's what I'm working on my project, here's a question I have, here's open suggestions, and there are probably a dozen different categories that people post these types of things. There are, generally speaking, 1,000 people online at a time in that server, and there are, I don't know how many members who are overall, tens of thousands, I think. And it's really interesting to see the change from emailing someone with a question or texting versus this live, vibrant community. And another way to share is to write a tutorial. So this is something that you can do, like I said, on a blog, but you can also create an account on Instructables and post up the steps that you've created for a project. And the nice thing there is they have very nice documentation management software or system at Instructables, so you can go and say, okay, I want to have 4 pictures for this step, and then it does little bullet points, next step. So it helps you organize things, which is, I think, a real benefit. And make an Adafruit Hack-A-Day, and there are Hackster.io, there are a bunch of different places in this kind of realm, in Maker Faire-ish, Maker types of tutorials that you can find online. But you can find them out there for almost any interest you have. There's probably a site where people are posting tutorials, so I say seek it out. All right, so here's a typical Google Hangout show and tell for Adafruit, and there's the group of us each watching each other's show and tell and waiting our turn to show the thing we're doing. This is this guy JMK, who is showing off a turntable he's built using some Little Bits. I don't know if anyone has seen Little Bits out around the fair, but it's a very nice plug-and-play sort of Lego of electronics. So he set up a little turntable there using some recycled cardboard box so that he can show off projects, which is really cool. And it's a tremendous project. You might consider it a little simple if you know this kid, because he's also written his own operating system. So like we go on here and you never know what people are going to be showing off, and it's it's stunning sometimes, the level of sophistication that people are doing, but it's their enthusiasm that they have that I think is really noteworthy. All right, what I also have here is an example of, so I had an old clarinet from when I was a kid. My daughter wanted to try playing it, and the cork had all dried out, so I went onto YouTube. I found this guy who was an Army Master Sergeant for the U.S. Army Band, and he has this awesome YouTube channel where he just shares how to repair instruments. So I learned how to do it. I ordered the right parts. I recorked this clarinet, and then I shared just an Instagram. I said, here's how I've done it. And then I linked back to, here's this guy who's a real master at this stuff. Check out his work, which was a lot of fun. Here are some synthesizer projects and other things from my Instagram. I'll actually show some of these if we have time. And again, I like just throwing things out there. This is a blog that I have. I decided to, oh, I'm not showing you that, sorry. Synth projects and an old TV that I gutted. So there's me restoring a Game Boy. I got this at a yard sale for I think $3 or $4, and also had this great game Alleyway with it. But it was super yellowed, and I went online, and there's this whole community of vintage computer restoration people who 10 years or 15 years ago or so, someone figured out why this yellowing happens, and it was a fire retardant that was blown into the plastic called bromine, and over time it raises to the surface and it looks horrible. Turns out you can use hydrogen peroxide and a activator like people use for hair, and sunlight, put it in a thing of saran wrap and set it outside for a whole day, and this is the difference. So I was very excited to show this much better looking Game Boy. The screen is still kind of horrible. It's got some work to be done. This is Discord. So this is a typical chat where people are talking about some of their projects and some of their choices they're making on parts and how they're going to access the functions they want in software. And along the side here you can see help with all these channels for different interests that people have. What am I showing next? Okay, so here's a more formal tutorial. And this is for a tutorial I wrote for the Adafruit Learn Guide on building a drum machine. It's a step sequencer that uses little optical sensors. These look for black marks. Wherever it sees a black mark, it plays a drum sound for that particular sound or track. And there's it's a multi-page tutorial. It's got software examples, some diagrams, more diagrams, how you cut out the disc, how you put it together. Maybe this movie will play, let's see. It glitches at one point, you get really strange. Right there, missed a note. So that's what a typical Adafruit Learn Guide ends up being, a real step-by-step. You can actually build this project based on all these steps, so it requires, as you can imagine, a lot of detail. So now we talked about the challenge, the need to, or want, or desire to share. We've talked about some ways to do it. Of course, there are some challenges. These are some, and people may come up with others, but one, documentation takes time. So it does definitely extend the length of your project. How many people here, show of hands, have documented something, a project, while they've built it? Yeah. Okay, and you can keep your hand up if you think it definitely slows the project down, right? sometimes you just don't want to do it. You're like, okay, fine, I'm going to hate myself tomorrow if there's not pictures of this step. It's going to be terrible. So I do sometimes, so I'm really lucky, right? My job is actually to build stuff and document it and share it, which I absolutely love to do. But I do sometimes selfishly say, I'm going to build a thing or do something or repair a thing, fabricate something, and I'm going to take pictures and just do it for me. So like once a year, I'll do that. It can turn a hobby into work if you get on a schedule. So this is more of a niche thing. Don't worry about this at first. But if you start to, I know there's definitely some people here in the audience who have gotten to a point where they are on a schedule. They have an audience. They maybe are making money through making and documenting. It can change things for your love for your hobby if it starts to feel like work. And I can talk offline with people about ways to try to deal with that, but it's a reality, and it can change the equation. And it also requires vulnerability. Right? It's putting yourself out there. This is a scary thing sometimes. Sometimes it's not. It depends on your personality, the type of project you're doing, the type of people you're sharing with. Certainly, there's a difference between one-on-one human contact versus what can be a cesspool of online negativity, depending on where you put things. So learning how to care about the comments that matter to you and ignore the ones that don't can be a tricky thing to navigate as well. I'm going to try to catch up with myself here. Let's see, what's our time? We have about 15 minutes? Okay. So some tips that I have for sharing. When I said it can slow your project down, right? That was that first possible downside. So what I recommend is, as much as you can, reduce the friction. Make it easier. As easy as you can make it to do your documentation, the better. In the earlier days of me documenting these types of projects, I was using digital SLR cameras and fancy lenses and doing a bunch of processing, and it made images look beautiful, but now, with the quality of an iPhone 8 and better, iPad Pro, I do a lot of my documentation with those now because you have a real big viewport. You can see how things are arranged in your screen. There's a lot of these type of making projects you want to have your hands in there, which raises another part. You can see me here looking like a bit of a fool with my earbuds in my mouth. So I took an old pair of earbuds and trimmed off the actual earphone parts, but that little clicker that you use to change the volume or pause actually is the shutter release for your phone or your iPad. So I just stick that into the headphone slot. I mount my phone or camera, whatever I'm using. You can see this picture's a bit of a lie. I'm actually triggering an iPad that I'm holding out here while I'm looking at my phone that's not plugged into anything. I just did that so you guys can kind of get the idea. But that is a big improvement over hitting a interval timer or something and saying, okay, in 4 seconds the shutter's going to go off and then you put your hands in there. So I've built a couple of different versions. I had an arcade button hooked up to my DSLR years ago, and I would hold it in my mouth and I would hit it with my tongue, which was gross and weird. And you can imagine the saliva. So now breathe now, sorry. And this is an improvement, but a weird thing that happened, this is not a lie. At one point, at multiple points over the last decade of me documenting projects, I have been building things, and when I do a step, especially if I'm like just soldering, and then I flick my tongue against my teeth and realize I just thought I had that arcade button in my mouth, and my reptile brain just went, like, which is really weird. I can tell I've freaked out a lot of you, which is okay. Have a way to mount it, so you can use tripod cases for phones and things like that. This is actually like a car mount that suction cups to the windshield that I've just chucked it into another vise. So any way you can, get your phone so you're not, it's really nice if all your, like a series of photos are actually, the camera's not moving. It allows you to do things like edit, pull backgrounds out when some weird object comes in there. So trying to have consistent photos, that's great. You don't have to do that at first. You can do this all handheld, but these are some tips I think that can help. Good lighting matters, so you can do it pretty inexpensively. You can go on Instructables and check out some guides. Actually, I wrote a guide on Adafruit for building like a light stage box out of foam core, magnets, and wood blocks. But if you can make a nice attempt at good lighting, it makes everything better, and people really appreciate it. Unlike this one, this is terrible lighting, and I had to do a lot of editing to get that photo with sunlight in the back. But, and if you're doing video, I would say one really helpful tip is get a microphone that's better than just the ambient room noise mic that's on your phone. So even if that's your earbud clipped here, or bilateral mic, or shotgun mics, you can get fancy. You don't have to spend a lot, but just making the mic pick up your voice only is really helpful for video. Another tip for sharing, this is an important one, is share your failures and your processes. And so Mario mentioned this, it's something I mentioned when I came out. Showing how things went wrong is really instructive, probably 10 times more instructive than things going right most of the time. Hopefully it comes around and does go right, but even if it doesn't, it can be a cautionary tale if you're building a thing that's just like, this is actually a terrible approach, and here you go, you can not make this mistake yourself. So the process as well, so not just here's the parts, here's the final thing, but the steps that you do along the way. And engage with other makers. So if you can receive feedback from people, watch other people's stuff and give them feedback, it is, again, like this sort of nice virtuous loop of making and sharing. Everyone is happy. So some examples. this is a mystery box. I created a series of these mystery box escape room types of projects for Adafruit, and they coincided with some contract work I was doing with an illusionist. This one, let me show you what it does. It's a little lockbox that requires someone to find this other artifact in the escape room to be able to get inside. Placing that artifact on top allows the thing to open. And I actually posted a teaser of this, and maybe this one here, I don't know if that's a video or a GIF, you may or may not play, but same sort of thing. I posted a little video of what I was thinking, and actually what happened was I decided I was going to make, I just needed to get something out there that showed the concept. And I had plans on how I was going to build it that were somewhat sophisticated. So I was going to use radio frequency identification, which is similar to the way you can pay with your phone or badge into a building. And this prototype I built instead was, this prototype I built was actually a very simple circuit, and in the need to document and show a teaser, I built a thing that I realized was the right thing. It was better than what I had planned because it's very inexpensive. The parts are really simple. All that we have is a little thing called a reed switch, which is, it can sense a magnet and it closes the contact on the switch, that white thing at the top. Oh, I have a laser. Is this the laser? It is. So that, when it's in the presence of a magnet, is just closing a circuit of this battery pack to this solenoid. A solenoid is like a magnetic coil that can throw a little shaft one way or another when it receives current, and so that pulls out of the way and allows the top to open. So I had inadvertently built a much better project than one I was planning. Here's an example of trying to document it well. I actually had a few of these boxes, and I just took one of the bandsaw and cut it in half so that I could show inside it, because otherwise it also was helpful for me knowing where I was going to put this little cup hook that actually locks the thing. So again, documenting helped me get to the final project, I think. There I drilled out this little resin ornament to put a magnet in it and painted over it. That's actually how the lock works. And there's an example of our little solenoid throwing that shaft when the magnet gets near. All right, so this one, the OVERWATCH blaster. This was a much more sophisticated, complicated project that's based on a video game. So I was building this prop from a video game, kind of cosplay prop. And let me show it off. I brought it here. And if you can, if you're traveling with stuff, get a big Pelican case because they're impressive and cool. So this is this blaster I built. And it is a bunch of 3D printed parts. And then I'm using a product called Subaru, which is a curable rubber glue type of stuff to seal up some parts of it. And make it hold together nicer. And it's a bunch of RGB LED rings and strips and a big giant speaker in the front, which is pretty much what the character of the game plays music through his blaster. Let me turn it on here. Live demo, see if it works.
Oh.
There we go. So it plays background music for the character. He can switch his background music when he's in a different mode. And we've got a couple triggers here so we can. No offense, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have pointed at you. And I got a forward trigger that launches a big blast. I put tilt switches in it so that I can recharge. Load of it, and it's a dumb little simple. It's a ball inside of a cylinder. That's a little tilt switch instead of something sophisticated like an accelerometer. And this is a special. Oh. Okay. So that's a LUCIO blaster. So this thing, as you can imagine, was a much I'll have it outside after this if you want to play with it. The need here was to break it out into multiple guides. It's maybe one of the only ones I've done like this where I just didn't want to build one 27-page long tutorial. So I broke it out, and again, it was really helpful for me because this was kind of in real time. I wrote the first tutorial before I had the finished thing. So in the first tutorial, I just showed how you get the lights to do what the lights do with a button. Then I added on how do we get these sound effects, and then I added on how do we do the background music. and weave all that together and 3D print the thing and shove it into there. So let me forward advance here. There's the parts of the model. There's a piece of software I use called Fritzing, which is free and open source and allows you to diagram 3D, or rather electronics schematics in a way that's really friendly. So it does not look like just symbols and lines, but the parts look like what the parts look like. So I find that to be really helpful. Here's labeling the real thing. I took the time to point what things were on the breadboarded version of it. With some assembly. This was also, I have a notebook, these maker notebooks, and I had sort of drawn out what the parts were that I was going to use, and then I was trying to make some decisions about how I want to route things, and I have a piece of overhead transparency, like acetate in the back of the notebook that I pull out and just use like an overhead marker on to try things and then erase them, and I shared that online, and my friend Gareth Brandwin, he's a writer who does tips columns online. He's written a book on tips, and so he's like, hey, I'm going to share this out. So this it was really exciting for me, but it's this sharing of my thing led to more sharing of the thing, which hopefully was helpful to other makers. And let's see. Last example I'll talk about is do-it-yourself MIDI music controllers, and these if I have time, I'll fire these up right at the end. So I was making this music controller. It can control synthesizers that are on software, and it can control physical, real synthesizers. It's a bunch of knobs, and it allows, especially on software, you not to be clicking on a screen, but instead twisting these knobs. So the thing is, knobs can be a little bit touchy, and if you're using them for things like volume or the shape of a filter or an equalization, no one notices. But I was actually wanting to use it as a step sequencer, which means I turn a knob to say, this is going to play a middle C, and this next knob is playing an E, and this knob is playing a G. And I was noticing that these knobs were a little noisy, and so the notes were changing on me, and I did not need them to change on me. I needed to stay put. As I was sharing it, one of the community members on Discord, a guy goes by the handle Cedar Grove, he thought this was an interesting problem, and he ended up writing a software library to solve it for me and for himself and anyone else who's doing these types of projects. So this range slicer ends up fixing the problem with a fancy thing called hysteresis. But the important part was this sharing of what I was working on before I was done led him to write a piece of software that I pulled in and published with my project to the final and improved the whole thing. And all right, and so last I'll just talk about how I'm sharing in specific with Adafruit right now. So I, every Thursday, I have a half-hour live stream show. It's called John Park's Workshop. And I broadcast it from my workshop, and then it hits a thing called Restream.io. This website that sprays it out to Facebook and to Twitch and to Periscope and YouTube for me, which is great. I only have one stream leaving my workshop. I've done 82 or 83 episodes, I think, at this point. In the format of it, I break it up into the build of the week. So essentially every week I write a new tutorial. And whatever that project is I'm building, I show it sort of cooking show style in the show. I'll pick out one or two interesting things to show live. Those are the things that sometimes go wrong. They're fun to see how I handle. And then I'll pull out the final demo and say, this is the final project. It's going to be a tutorial the next day. And then I also show a thing called Make Code Minute. If anyone's familiar with Make Code or Scratch or Blockly, these are these great graphical programming languages. And so I do, it's actually 2.5 minutes because I'm a massive liar. It just does not fit in a minute. But Make Code Minute sounds better. Make Code Minute I show on usually Circuit, Playground Express, or other hardware, or now with this new arcade in-browser version. And then I'll do a little product of the week and a mini build based around that. And I have real-time chat going in YouTube and Discord. I can't pay attention. I'm actually not a good multitasker, so it's amazing. I hold it together with this. So I kind of ignore the chat over in Facebook, sorry, and Twitch, but in these two places I'm interacting with people who are watching the show, which is really helpful because they'll often point out improvements, mistakes, answer questions that I have in real time. I do it one-man band style, so it's me, and so I have 3 cameras. I built a little camera switcher. I use some software called Wirecast that handles me doing layers and picture-in-picture. This is amazing. This was like $500,000 TV studio 20 years ago to try to do something like this, and it's largely free software, some of it we pay for. But a lot of that was figured out. I will say Phil Terone and Laura Freed of Adafruit share everything. They've always shared everything. They're an open source company. They readily share this information about what equipment am I using to do the camera switching and convert the HDMI to USB and so on. So they're sharing really accelerated my ability to get this working. And lastly, I also built, sometimes my audio would go out just for dumb me reasons, and I'd be 2 minutes, 5 minutes, I finally look at the chat and go, oh my God. So I built this thing now that one of our users and a couple other people at Adafruit have a web browser button they can hit that actually goes, and will light up alarm, light stop over the corner. So 10 seconds of me like screwing up my audio, and I hear about it, which is very helpful. These are the tutorials I've done for the Adafruit Learn guide. So I've done 117 or 18 of them in the couple years, 3 years that I've been working with Adafruit, and I'm very proud of these and very excited to see them all up as little thumbnails. And it's probably definitely proof that, like I said, I've never given up on show and tell. I really love it. So I want to thank you for coming. If we have time for questions, so I don't want to slow down the next talk. Please come see Anouk, who's got
so we're going to do
talk coming up.
5 minutes of questions, and then what we'll do is John is going to step outside. We're out together some tables for him. You guys can come and take pictures, ask him questions, show off some of the gear. But we want to do a panoramic. So we want everybody to stand still. And John, we'll put you here.
Oh gosh.
And we'll do panoramics. We can post this. So everybody, you can put your hands up. Put your hands up. Here we go. Ready? We're going to look this way. But now you can't move. Ready? Yes. You can go this side. So any quick questions for John?
Yes.
What's the largest project you've had with the most motors in it?
The largest project you've had with the most motors in it, and how'd you control them?
I haven't done many projects that involve lots of motors, and reason being most of the projects I'm doing now are to share out to other people, and big motor robotics types of projects are outside of the realm of sort of the simple hobbyist stuff that Adafruit focuses on. I've done some simple stuff with motors that I'm really proud of. I've made some illusions for magicians that involve stepper motors and really long pieces of black thread. Without giving out too much, there's a lot of stuff you'll see in stage shows where people have to be very careful to not walk through black thread or piano wire or things that are pulling on stuff. And so for those, I've used actually some of the stepper drivers that are inside of the Adafruit Cricut, or just the breakout boards. But the Cricut, again, the Cricut board is simple entry into robotics. It can handle some steppers, it can handle some DC motors, it can handle some solenoids or magnets, but it's all 5-volt stuff. It's not getting into big, hard to manage things.
Question.
Hey John, I really enjoy your content. I really appreciate you sharing everything. How do you share with your children? How are they interacting with the stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, it's I let them drive what they're interested in, so I have not tried to shove things down their throat. It's very instructive that growing up, my son was very interested in building a Lego set and then playing with the characters and making stories and smashing everything, but and he's a performer and that's what he loves to do, and he's not that interested in making physical things as much as performances. Whereas my daughter was much more of and is still a very creative builder of things, and so we do projects together much more frequently, where she'll say, hey, I think we should make 3D printed coasters for everyone in the family for Christmas. And so we'll design it and try to sit down and have her learn the software of the 3D printing. Yeah.
One more question, and then we'll.
When you work with Raspberry Pis, do you prefer to use Python or Node.js, and why?
Yeah, I actually don't do much work with Raspberry Pis. I've tended to do like game projects with RetroPie and a little bit of Python, but it's just I'm not a coder. I know how to code things to get the job done, but I'm not a software developer by nature, so the few areas that I have proficiency are things like Arduino and some software from my graphics days, and now Python.
Okay, yes, thank you.
All right.
Okay, so if you give us 2 minutes, we're gonna have John outside, but the next talk is Anouk. She's phenomenal, so I want everybody to have time to go outside, get some pictures of John, meet some of the equipment, and get back in, okay? Thank you very much, guys. Big hands for John. He came a long way.